Hello. All right. So, as philosophers today, in a world saturated by the various kinds of media, we are confronted by applications on phones, emails, television screens, advertising boards, not to mention a traditional educational system. We are faced with problems in our ability to communicate, which probably are novel as a generational sense. And it's funny that the very tools, the very mediums which we use to help us get across to each other have in some ways made getting across to each other more difficult. And as technologically novel as this situation may appear, it may not literally be the first time we have been confronted by such issues. And in some ways, it's really perhaps not radically different from when we were as a child trying to learn a new language. And what do you see there? You basically see a set of symbols, you hear foreign sounding sounds, and you try and decipher relations between uh, sounds and objects, maybe the signifier and the signified, as Sassoon may say. You try and internalize the grammar of sentences to see how they relate to each other, what someone may be trying to express when they speak to you. And the world of images, iconography, advertisement, in some senses, may not be entirely dissimilar to someone who has just woken up from hibernation or something. And there would be ways in which we may have to deal with it if we cannot censor it. As effective as your ad blocker icon on your browser may be. But since this is in some ways also an older problem in philosophy, what I've tried to identify as a certain kind of antagonism between the image and the word, I thought I'd present a few notes that I made on it. And hopefully it may be stimulating to some of the kinds of situations and problems we face in our present. Ontological incompleteness between image and concept. There is, among philosophers, a distrust for the use of images in communication. Evidence for this may be found at a superficial level in their use of the medium of the written word itself. Those who may like a more engaged argument regarding the opacities of what on the face of it is merely apparent in an image may refer to the early Wittgenstein, or why not Hegel's critique of the immediate in the beginning of the phenomenology. And well, just to briefly clarify what the latter may be, let's say you were to be confronted with an exclamative, just a declaration, a voice from outside the screen that says this. And while that may express some kind of immediate content to the person who believes they have identified something, it literally wouldn't be cognizable as even a marker of memory for another. And perhaps there may be something in the instant which perhaps is thought to be transformative, but when it is intransmissible, I wonder what kind of instant we are talking about apart from just a dull, mute immediacy, which is, Hegel's point there. And later, of course, I may try and clarify how Wittgenstein's critique of picture thinking differs from Hegel's critique of the immediate in phenomenology, but for a later date. The question that I would like to pose, however, is whether there is a kind of continuity we can find in approaches to this problem. And here, I think we will better appreciate where we may be forced to take sides. Is our apprehension of an image a step on the way to understanding, or is the cognition of the image understanding itself? Leaving aside dialectical critiques of sheer understanding or Vorstellung, let us begin with this problem. There is another way to pose the question we have presented above. What would it mean to cognize an image I have no concept of? Why is this similar? I hope you can spot the trajectory. If in confronting an image, I have yet to cognize what it may stand for, would this not be the same as cognizing an image I have no concept of? An unknown. And I think this does place more immediately the nature of our problem. We may say that there is a way in which focusing on the act of a lack of nomenclature in confronting an image foregrounds, paradoxically, our dependence on nomenclature to understand what an image is. The discipline of philosophy has another way of posing this problem in a decidedly semantic register, and that is the problem of representation. What, for instance, is, let's say, the image of a triangle? You may say that this is a triangle. Is that only a triangle? No, like a triangle like this, for instance, an isosceles triangle perhaps, is also a triangle. Thus, does this represent an inadequacy in our understanding of what a triangle is? Here, there are two ways of interpreting the situation. Are we asking what this is, or are we asking what a triangle is? If the former, we may state that the image is an isosceles triangle, that is, with equal sides, as opposed to image 2, the second example. If the latter, another way of representing what a triangle is any polygon whose sum of internal angles is 180 degrees. Yet another is any closed three-sided polygon. All of those would be triangles. Yet let us backtrack a bit in trying to explain what this is, which of these trajectories seemed adequate. This is, in a simplified analogy, what the problem of representation seeks to pose in philosophy. And I do emphasize the simplicity of this rather paltry analogy. A geometrician may, of course, point out the correlation between both these descriptions, that of the close-sided figure with three sides whose internal angles is 180, and of course, the pictorial representations and things of that kind. Yet the imagistic objection is not a simple one. You would rarely trade your slice of pizza, for example, for an outline on a drawing board. This, however, while a bad joke, is also insincere. For a slice of pizza is not a triangle. And the reason a slice of pizza is not this. And the reason my culinary jibe works is because of the specificity of its example. This, as it were, the singularity, appears to remain the picturesque objection to our generic representations. In approaching the dilemma of the image and the adequacy of a concept to it, if that is all a concept is from a decidedly imagistic, pictorial, or perhaps geometric angle, we would find that a multi-sided polygon located within a circle may appear as one in approximation. That is, a multi-sided polygon inside a circle with enough sides would resemble the circle. Yet, as Hegel points out, quoted by Andrew Cole, whose lecture on Hegel, geometry, and the dialectic, delivered in Ljubljana in January 2018, which I do hazard a response to, an approximation of a magnitude regarding the other, which is what the multi-sided polygon would seek to do in approaching its identity or approximation with the circle, is not yet the form in question itself. In other words, however similar a multi-sided polygon is to a circle, it is yet different, or as Plato teaches, likeness can be a form of difference itself. We are reminded by Professor Cole that it is Hegel himself who elsewhere stresses that identity and opposition are themselves not necessarily in opposition when united in the principle of contradiction. Identity and opposition are themselves not necessarily in opposition. When united in the principle of contradiction. Such a logic, of course, takes opposition itself to be an identity in the first place, a point which Deleuze would later use to build his ontological edifice. The monkey in the room here is, of course, this question which my title undoubtedly suggested. Is there a teleology from image to concept? The grander dialectical observation which this links to is the one regarding quantitative changes issuing forth, or rather producing, a qualitative difference. The example here is of a field which may be an acre and may have to add it to it. This is a change in magnitude, but is perhaps not what makes it a field as opposed to a meadow or a forest. There are objections, however, which Hegel himself places in the way of this. The representation, or should I say presentation, of a concept leaves a possible wealth of conceptual apparatus out of what an image may accomplish, such as perhaps in the form of a well laid out diagram. Or it is one thing to say that a sphere is a circle made out of circles, i.e., the circle of circles, and quite another to draw it. In wrapping up my observations, I think Mladen Doller has a very concise and near algebraic reading of the presentation delivered by Professor Cole at Ljubljana. The figure is the other of the concept, yet it is a true dialectical difference because the figure itself is figurative. In other words, may be used to express a concept. And for the last twist, figures may even produce a concept dialectically, that is, as a product of their antagonisms. Now I must state that I perhaps didn't present the clearest of readings, and in apology for that, I shall leave the copy of the text in the description. But I do believe that this opens up not a can of worms, but a very real conceptual issue which we presently do face and deal with. I mean, how does um, the the relative weights that we attach to certain forms of media correlate with our generalized forms of communication and exchange? I mean, what balance do we offer to an image or a video, or let's say an audio recording, as opposed to slightly more traditional forms of um, representation and things of that sort? I mean, there must have been a time when people doubted severely the limits of an imagistic register, and I believe the history of painting would have illustrations which repeatedly defy what such reductions, delimitations may be. Like, for example, I think in a lot of early modern art, you have a lot of portraits where we see people only in profile in relation to each other, on like a single plane spatially. There is no depth in the image because everyone seems to be occupying the same point in space in relation to how far they may be from you. Or another way of putting this is that there is no differentiation between foreground and background. And of course, there are many conceptual issues that such a form of representation raises, like, for example, whether the question of privacy and publicity, whether this is a decidedly modern register, or, for example, whether the idea of a child daydreaming while staring out of a window can happen only within the institutionalized settings of a school as presented in a post industrial epoch. And there may be narratives that bear testimony to this. And these may be fascinating questions worth taking up. And those would be, for me, examples of an imagistic register, perhaps in painting, perhaps sublated via the means of technology in photography or videography today. Ways in which it supersedes what an earlier impression of its conceptual apparatus was. Because it truly does now use the expressive abilities of the image in ways to produce concepts in ways that we thought the medium was not capable of. And I think this is the point. And it's something that Hegel will return to, but of course, his preferred means of expressing this would remain the word. I have sadly not read some of the early Wittgenstein on this, but at the price of not rambling too much, I shall cut this short for now and attach the brief text. I hope that this has made you think a little about some of the issues we do face today, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon and bid you farewell. Bye bye.